The New South Institute is publishing a series of publications looking at how African migration and free movement is governed. The project aims to identify ways of making it easier for Africans to move and settle across the continent. To unpack this further, I'm joined by the leader of the Migration Governance Reform Program at the New South Institute, Professor Alan Hirsch. Good morning to you, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us here on the South African Morning. There seems to be a hesitation around freer movement within the African continent. Can we just unpack as to why? What are the concerns?
Well, firstly, good morning. Thank you very much for the chance to talk to you about our project. And also, before going into the challenges, just to say that in general, the trend has been in the right direction in Africa over the last 10 years or so. That there has been some opening up and there are some significant initiatives, but it's not an uncomplicated thing at all. There are some African countries like South Africa, like some North African countries, and a number of countries in Africa that are relatively rich compared with their neighbors and offer significant social benefits and perhaps opportunities for jobs. But within them, they're also relatively unequal. So South Africa has a high level of inequality and a high level of unemployment. Makes it very difficult for South African policymakers to explain why we want to be somewhat more liberal in relation to our neighbors in being allowed to live and work and stay in our country and enter and leave relatively freely. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement has made really significant progress in moving forward on trade. We're moving forward on investment and the movement of capital. The movement of people is a little way behind, but there is significant progress. It's just can be very difficult politically in countries where the people are concerned about their social circumstances and their opportunities in the future.
Professor, let's chat maybe about one of the concerns being unregulated movement and how that could possibly be managed. Is this a conversation that comes up regularly in your research? Is this one of the concerns?
Certainly, I mean, absolutely. And, the irony that we've learned in migration policy analysis is that, it tends to be the fact that the more barriers you put up, the more irregular migration there is going to be. If people want to come to your country, they probably will. I mean, we're finding that at the moment in the Mediterranean countries in Europe. We're finding it at the moment in the UK, where I'm temporarily located, where people are crossing by boats, where the rate of migration is actually relatively high, even though the government has staked its future on lowering the migration rate. So, I guess that's the problem. The problem is that the more barriers you put up, the more tempted people are going to be to move around those barriers. So the question is, how do you find a balance between encouraging people to use the regular channels and preventing people from using the irregular channels? It's quite a difficult balance. And finding that balance is something that I think we're still trying to do in South Africa and in a number of other African countries.
It's a very interesting conversation, Professor. Unfortunately, I have run out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us and sharing some of your insights. That was Professor Alan Hirsch, just talking to us about the opportunities in a freer movement amongst the African countries and on the African continent, some of the barriers to entry there and also some of the concerns being discussed as well.